Welcome back to Elite Literary Book Group. I'm Rachel Beck, and I'm excited to start discussing Catcher in the Rye with you. I have a lot of things that I could say about Salinger and about the book as a way of introduction, but I think what I'll start with is the fact that the book is seen as controversial. And actually, I'm holding my mug of banned books that one of my students gave me, and Catcher in the Rye is right over here. I love that a student goes out somewhere and sees a mug like this and thinks immediately of me. And so I really appreciate that. The thing about Catcher in the Rye is in any literature that people dismiss, it's usually because they miss the forest for the trees. In Holden's voice, he cusses, he's saying inappropriate words, and some of the things that he does is kind of, sketchy. But I'm going to suggest that he's really no different than any other teenager, whether even boy or girl, but especially a teenage boy at this time who is trying to just figure out life and doesn't want to be what everybody else wants him to be. And people think, because he's on like the verge of a nervous breakdown in the story, but many people have said that he's crazy. And I don't think he's crazy at all. And he's dealing with the fact that he's getting older, and he's very tall for his age. He even says that he has gray hair. And it's just, and of course, whatever hormones and everything else that goes with it. But there's also a part of him that wants to stay pure. And this is what I mean by missing the forest for the trees. To say, oh, this is a bad book because this is what he says. When in fact, he may be encouraging young men to try to maintain their innocence, their virginity. And if you really understand the book and you read the book, you realize that just like any other short story, which I'll be referring to from Salinger, it's always goes back to a childlike innocence. How can that be wrong? You think about when parents, which are part of the problem as why books like this get taken away from students to read, is because they miss the forest for the trees, and they think, well, I don't want my son reading a book like that. I would feel like if I knew that this was the worst thing that my son was looking at, I would feel pretty incredible. I would feel very blessed. But I know that he also has access to the internet, and just any given day on even, walking through the halls, you're going to hear language and you're going to see pornographic things. And that's a reality for us, especially today with technology. Why would you be worried about what he might think while reading a book? Come on. So I've had this fight, and so obviously if you're reading it, then I don't have to preach this sermon to you. But it's not what people think and I think that because the book has been in possession of people. The guy who shot John Lennon and even Reagan both had a copy of the book, and they too saw the world as a bunch of phonies. But you have to understand that they're also, in their own insane mindset, are projecting onto the novel. Salinger is, looking for an authentic voice and and wanting to find something noble to do with his life, which is ultimately to catch children from falling off the cliff of that phony adult world, from being just superficial, materialistic, fake. I'll even suggest that there is kind of a spiritual element to the book. And the reason why I say that is once I was teaching this, and usually when I'm teaching and the students are reading something, I'll read it again, but I'll also read something else that the author wrote just to see what comes up, and something usually serendipitously appears. And so one time I was teaching an AP class, and I was reading Franny and Zoe, or Zooey. I've heard it pronounced both ways. And Franny is also going through kind of a nervous breakdown, and she's reading a book called The Way of the Pilgrim. And I couldn't believe this, because this is a Russian Orthodox book and a classic, but most Western people and Western authors do not allude to this book. This is the first time I've ever seen anything like this. And I mean, when I saw that, it was like one of the best days of my life, because being Russian Orthodox, and I had in possession at the time The Way of the Pilgrim. I've since loaned it out and didn't get it back. But the premise of that book is it's about a monk who wants to be able to live in prayer, just as I believe St. Paul suggests, pray without ceasing. And there's Jesus' prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And it becomes a mantra for a Christian to say over and over and over. And the thing I really liked about The Way of the Pilgrim, and what it suggests as a spiritual practice and a spiritual life, is to have one foot in this world, but another foot out in the spiritual eternity, so that you're not consumed by this world. And this would have been interesting, even though I think Salinger, as a Zen Buddhist, probably was a little hostile towards the idea of Christianity. What interested me was that he was accepting of the Eastern Christianity, which before prosperity gospel became popular, before people kind of started projecting Christ onto Christ, as Harold Bloom would say, that he's become more American than he's become than Christ. Originally, holy, pious saints, they gave all their money away. Oftentimes they were rich, and they gave all their money to the poor. And if you look at St. John the Latter's Divine Ascent, St. John Climacus writes kind of a guide of how to get to be closer to God. Okay, so this is also under the Eastern Orthodox religious context. And one of the first things that he says you have to do is to renounce the world. And then the second thing is detachment. So if you look at what Holden Caulfield is actually trying to do emotionally, even though it may come off, as uncouth in some ways, what he's really doing is detaching himself and renouncing the world. So I'm going to go more in detail about Salinger's life as we go along. But what I typically do in these courses is I start with a Q3 question. And so I want to start with this Q3 question. I just kind of pick one. They release all the questions, prompts. And, it's not going to be reoccurring, but you can get an idea of how to discuss the novel in the specific question that it's asking you to address, but by doing that, you have to reveal the work as a whole, which is why it's important for you to read the book. As always, if you go through my lectures, you will have more than enough analysis, and it won't be just like a SparkNote analysis. I don't even look at SparkNotes. I base it based on experience. Definition of madness is mental delusion or eccentric behavior arising from it. But Emily Dickinson wrote, "Much madness is divinest sense to a discerning eye." Novelists and playwrights have often seen madness with a discerning eye. So we are going to look at Catcher in the Rye with a discerning eye at his so-called madness. So select the novel and play. The character's apparent madness or irrational behavior plays an important role. Then write a well-organized essay in which you explain what this delusion or eccentric behavior consists of and how it might be judged reasonable. Explain the significance of the madness to the work as a whole. Do not merely summarize the plot. And what I've pointed out in some of my other videos, what I do is I try to get to a claim statement, which is like a thesis statement. I just say claim because I want you to argue something instead of just stating something. If you state something, you're probably not being persuasive, and a 9 is persuasive. So you have to make an interpretation. And I think by looking at the background of Salinger in his own life and looking at Holden Caulfield and what he's really actually wanting to do is not insane at all. In fact, it is sanity. And what's not sane is the fact that people are like kind of programmed just to think a certain way and do certain things and to conform. I think that's real insanity.